Good morning, Waldo. Nice to see you sort of in person.
Same here, Ken.
I've been following your book for a while. It's a cool thing. It's great to have two former military officers, both of whom wrote books with some similar themes.
Absolutely.
You know, what caused you to what caused you to write the book in the first place? What was the motivator?
So, and as well, I want to say thank you, Ken, for taking the time to chat today, as well as an officer. Obviously, we have a couple of generations. You're Marines, I'm Air Force. You were in the Vietnam era. I was more in the 90s. And as we both know, especially because it's Veterans Day, many people, our compadres in the business world, kind of are innocently ignorant as to what it takes to survive and win in business, and how our military experiences, both in the Marines and infantry or as a fighter pilot in the air, relate to success in business, success in life. And I wrote the book because I wanted to peel back the curtain and show some of the nuances, the subtleties, the disciplines, the commitments it takes to operate in an environment where, if you don't do your job right, you may not have dinner again with your family. And I think that's something that separates folks like us from the average Joe or Joanne out there who may not have been in uniform and don't really understand that context.
I get that completely. You're right, it's Veterans Day. It's also the day after the Marine Corps birthday, and so the Marines have always appreciated that extra day off to recover from the celebration of the night before. But happy Veterans Day to you. I think I came at my book from maybe more of a frustration perspective than you did. I would spend a lot of time talking to friends in frustration, watching people do what I consider to be foolish things, sometimes illegal things, but often just foolish things. People, my brethren on Wall Street, but also people in the corporate environment, and it would just make me crazy. In the news these days is a bunch about Wells Fargo firing 5,000 people who opened 2 million accounts for people who had no idea that accounts were being opened in their names. And I would say to people, why do people do these things? Why can't they operate using some of the same principles that I learned when I was in the Marine Corps? They would make just as much money, and they wouldn't find themselves on the front pages of newspapers, and they wouldn't embarrass their mothers. And people would say to me, why don't you write a book about it? And so I started to put together a bunch of concepts. Took me a while. Took me almost 4 years to get my 11 principles together. How long did it take you to write yours?
I always say it took me my entire life, because I talk a lot about my background, my family, the values that I learned from my mother and father, and the things I learned at the Air Force Academy. So yeah, I would say it took me around 4 years to write it. But as you know, it's a life experience that's put into that book, distilled down into, so many words. It's not an easy thing to do. And I agree with you. I want to show everybody a picture of this book, because I have it here. I've been skimming through it. I saw you've been all over the media, and you have an amazing background in the corporate world. Can you share a little bit more about that? Because I think it makes you so credible with your constituents, with your peers, and the folks who are going to be picking up this book to read it.
Sure. Unlike a lot of bankers, for better or for worse, I have not spent a career on Wall Street. I spent 10 years in the Marine Corps, and even that was a bit different from your experience going through the Air Force Academy. I quit college to join the Marines. I actually quit twice. I quit the first time as a freshman during the height of Vietnam, but I told my parents that I was going to enlist in the Marine Corps. They were not pleased with that. My father served in World War II. My father went ashore at D-Day. My father is not a fan of war or the military. I don't know anybody that's a fan of war. But they talked me out of enlisting then, and so I went and surfed for a while. I bummed until I ran out of money. Then I worked in an auto upholstery repair place for a while, and then went back to school for a year, and then quit college again, and enlisted in the Marine Corps. The one thing I did different the second time is I just didn't tell my parents until it was too late. I was enlisted, went through boot camp, went to combat radio operators school, and was fortunate enough to get selected and go to officer candidate school, went to OCS, went to Marine Corps infantry basic training, went to 7th Marines, and spent 10 years in the Marine Corps. Went to the Far East twice. I did not go ashore in Vietnam. I was on a ship designed to carry Marines, a battalion of Marines and helicopters, and we spent time off the shore of Vietnam and off the shore of Cambodia, but I didn't have to go ashore. The Marines were great for me and shaped me, and undoubtedly, in many ways, made me who I am today. Amongst other things, the Marine Corps also allowed me to complete my undergraduate degree and to get my MBA. And so when I'd been in for 10 years, I had to make a decision. I was up for major, and it was either accept major and accept an additional 3-year obligation, which to me meant I was making a commitment to stay for 20 years or to move on. And so I decided to move on, looked for a job doing corporate strategy because I somewhat foolishly at the time believed that because I had done a lot of strategy work in the Marine Corps and some strategy work as part of my MBA program, that was translatable into corporate strategy work. I still think it's translatable, but I will say that most corporations didn't see that.
Right.
But I did get a great job offer. I got several great job offers, but I got one that I took from Dun & Bradstreet, which was a very different company than the one people know today. Dun & Bradstreet in those days operated much like Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway does. It was a holding company buying and selling information technology companies. And so we owned Moody's, the bond rating service. We bought AC Nielsen, which people know for their TV ratings and for their measurements of consumer goods. We own the Gartner Group, which tells people what's going on in the computer world. We started a company called Cognizant that does information technology outsourcing. We had 23 different divisions, and I did eventually get involved in helping to develop strategy for those companies and doing mergers and acquisitions, and spent 10 years there, coming from a fairly mid-level guy doing troubleshooting for the chief financial officer to being a senior vice president when I left there. And I left there for an opportunity to run a software and technology business that was owned by a bunch of Swiss banks. I grew that company and then ultimately got some financial backing, and with some partners bought that company. And then we acquired a small business in the UK. We acquired a small business in Japan. We joint ventured with Nomura. We took it globally, and then sold that business. Along the way, I raised capital for that business, debt and equity, and then we sold that business, and I ran another big business. So it was it gave me a great background to do the things that I'm doing today. I left there and then went to a private equity firm and saw it from that side, and then 14 years ago, with 3 other people, sat around my kitchen table and said, let's start an investment bank. So it's been a good ride.
So what was because obviously your experience is very broad and deep. A lot, I don't have as much of the embedded corporate experience as you, although I have an MBA and I was in a couple sales jobs before I became executive coach and speaker. But what were the things that you found? Because guys like us who leave the military, some find it very difficult to acclimate to the business world. Not everybody has the integrity or the commitment or the preparation focus, which you talk about in your book and also in my book. What did you find was like your biggest challenge? Because people don't necessarily have the same values that we were embracing in the military. What did you find, and what do you still find that's out there right now, Ken?
You know, I think there's a mixed feeling. Certainly, one of the very first feelings that I felt when I came out of the Marine Corps was a bit like a fish out of water. I think that people didn't know where to categorize me, and I didn't know where I fit in. I didn't know what to wear. I didn't always know how to act in meetings. In fact, a few times I think I had peers who suggested to me that I needed to sort of go along and get along, and that's not necessarily my nature as a Marine. If I see things that are not going in the direction I think they ought to go, then I have a tendency to step up and say something. It certainly took a little while for me to adjust to the rhythms of civilian life. I do think that I was fortunate in that I picked a company to go to that appreciated former military, both enlisted and officers, in which there were some other former military around me, and in which the senior management valued the traits that I brought to the job, even if a lot of the people at the middle level didn't fully appreciate it. Your comment about integrity and values is interesting. I believe that the vast majority of people want to do the right thing. I think that most people are not bad guys, but you get into companies that have cultures that value the individual over teams, which is clearly not the way that the military operates. You get into these cultures in which companies are valued based on the market cap of the company, and in which individuals are based on their valued based on their net worth, and people get warped. You see some of these companies in which they have reward systems that whether they intend them that way or not, they wind up encouraging people to engage in shady practices, in part because that's how they get rewarded, and in part because people who get caught don't really get punished. And that's a culture that the military would fight against. I always say in the Marine Corps, one of our mottos was do the right things for the right reasons every time, no excuses. And it would be nice if we could get that translated into the civilian world.
Yeah, so true. I think many times they don't have the leadership emulating those traits, and when you don't have a fellow executive or a peer or a leader who emulates that and sets the tone, sets the example, then that filters down to the rest of the squadron, so to speak. My concept, as you know, is about being a wingman, a trusted partner, and really creating environments where other people can come to for help. That's what a wingman is, and this is my book, Never Fly Solo. I know you have a copy of it as well, but it's about being able to look to your left and right and feel confident that that person, that organization, culturally speaking, that you so eloquently emulated and shared, is dependable. And those core values are so critical. I know in the Marine Corps you had values, in the Air Force and at the Academy. It was integrity first, service before self, commitment to excellence. Those weren't just words. They were bled into the DNA and of the blood and guts of every man and woman in that squadron. And I know you understand that. But in particular in the military, which I find it fascinating, Ken, is that, we know that if we don't do our job right, our lives are on the line. But with corporate America, to have that type of mentality that if we mess up, we can die. Hey, that's going to get you to prepare. That's going to make sure you build that trust. That's going to make sure that you have a culture that really allows you to perform. And so how do you share that sense of responsibility with people who are selling software or providing investment banking services or building a franchise, right? It's hard to do that.
I think you're absolutely right. I do think that the consequences in civilian world sometimes can be more serious than people realize. The second chapter of my book is called Take a Stand, and some people think that that's about being decisive. It's more about a willingness that you have in the Marine Corps to tell people things that they need to hear, even if they don't want to hear them. And I did notice that was a concept in your book as well. Sometimes it means speaking truth to power. There are a bunch of engineers at General Motors that had they spoken up sooner, General Motors wouldn't have been shipping cars with faulty ignition switches, and more than 50 people would be alive today. Those are pretty serious consequences for not taking a stand, not doing the right thing. There are a group of engineers or executives, I suppose, at Volkswagen that had they spoken up sooner, Volkswagen wouldn't have shipped tens of thousands of cars with emission systems that were polluting the air at rates far higher than they were permitted, far higher than they claimed they were. And Volkswagen wouldn't now be paying billions of dollars in fines and restitution and a loss to their reputation. Same thing is true in the Wells Fargo example that we just gave. And so the consequences to messing up in the civilian world can be serious. What hasn't been serious enough is building a culture that welcomes that sort of taking a stand, and building a culture that not only doesn't reward bad behavior, but quickly snuffs it out. And that just makes me crazy.
And it's hard, especially when you have different millennials and people with different religions and backgrounds and skin colors. We all know when we showed up at our platoon or squadron, you didn't know half the people, most of the people. You were put into this culture of diversity that most, quite frankly, civilians don't realize that we had such diversity. And one thing I think that's important, and I think you'll appreciate this, Ken, because it's even in your book. It's about focusing on the mission. In the military, I think we have to be mission focused, not relationship focused. I think in the business world, they say it's all about the relationship, and I think that can totally destroy the functionality and the discipline necessary to adapt, to innovate, to create environments where others can come to you for help and tell you what you need to hear and not what you want to hear, right? And if you're not approachable and coachable, if you're not willing to be wrong, if you're just worried about the relationship, hey, Ken and I were friends, we've known each other for 15 years, and I'll let your lack of integrity or the fact that you're not prepared walking into that meeting slide. And it would tick us off, wouldn't it, Ken, if we prepared to go to battle and our buddy was in the bar drinking that night, wasn't prepared for the mission. We could be friends, but at the end of the day, we have to be focused on the mission, getting everybody safely home, hitting the target, doing what needs to be done. And I think in the military, that's one thing that separates us from the civilian world, where it's a lot about, being a crony and not ticking people off. We want to tick people off. We want to do the right thing. Right?
I completely agree. I did see that you have that in your chapter about being prepared in your book, and I completely agree. I actually break that down to some extent into two different chapters, sort of two different related themes in my book. I do have a book about the importance of discipline. A lot of people associate discipline in the Marines somehow with people having blind obedience to orders. That's actually not true. It's just sort of this myth. But my focus in the book is about the discipline of not skipping steps, the discipline of preparing, something else you talk about, of planning, and I think you talk about chair flying in your book. I talk about rehearsing and the importance of doing the right things in the right order and not skipping steps, and doing it with discipline as critical to winning in any environment. I have a separate chapter which I think relates to what you're talking about mission. I call it taking the long view, and
Right.
and the concept of taking the long view is really one that says all tactics that a company takes ought to be designed to help the organization achieve some clearly defined, clearly measurable long-term goal. And we all ought to be on board with understanding what that long-term goal is, and every action that we take, whether it's hiring a person, opening an office, closing an office, buying a company, it all ought to advance the organization towards that clearly defined long-term goal. It sounds obvious. What I find, because we work with people a lot in strategy and we work with them in mergers and acquisitions, it's amazing how often people want to fight a battle just because they can. I've noted two acquisitions that have been in the news lately, and because that's my business, I pay attention to those. But one was Verizon buying Yahoo, and the other was Microsoft buying LinkedIn. Verizon buying Yahoo, I thought, made total sense in the context of the fact that they already own AOL. They already said that their long-term strategic mission for AOL is to make it the leader in consumer-oriented sports, news, entertainment, and the like. And I didn't know how they were going to do that with AOL alone, but when they announced that they were going to buy Yahoo, I said, okay, I get it. That fits their strategy. That makes sense. That makes them a powerhouse. It helps them both with the top line and the bottom line. The flip side of that was Microsoft buying LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is a really cool company. I was among the first 1,000 users of LinkedIn. Everybody in my company uses LinkedIn. We use it for all kinds of things. But like quite a number of other Microsoft deals, it was a deal that didn't need to be done to advance them towards a clearly defined long-term strategy. And I predict that just as they have with several other deals, they're going to wind up writing off a significant portion of the purchase price. Marines who see a bunch of bad guys on a hill someplace don't automatically go fight them. Sometimes we say, leave them on a hill. You don't have to fight every battle just because you can. You only need to fight the battles that you need to fight.
There's a saying I like. It's beware of distractions disguised as opportunities. And many times on a micro level, and as leaders, we wake up every day and there's the emails are coming in, the phone calls, the potential opportunities that are really distractions from staying on that target. In the fighter pilot world, we never fly solo. We have men and women in formation backing each other up. And there's one flight lead, and he or she's flying with a wingman, right? Now, the wingman isn't a flight lead, but the flight lead is a wingman. They provide this mutual support. Many times the wingman, they see something, as he or she should, a target, a potential threat. And if it's not a factor to the formation, if it's not going to be a threat to our ability to take out the target, to take that long-term strategic objective that you just mentioned, if it's going to detract us from that mission, then we have to let it be. We may be able to get that low-hanging fruit, shoot down the target, et cetera, but if it takes us off that strategic goal, it's important. And I think it's not only important, Ken, on a strategic level from a organizational perspective, making the right acquisitions, figuring out what technology you're going to assimilate, what clients you're going to go after or say no to. It also applies to us as individuals when we strap into our cockpit every single day and say, what am I going to do today? What's my short-term objective today? What do I need to get done to advance me to that point as a business leader, as an entrepreneur, as an executive that will help continue me on this trajectory of success, of growth, of freedom, whatever it is. And we need to be very careful with avoiding distractions, as well as incorporating into our daily practices other folks, other wingmen, who can tell us the missiles that we may be missing or the targets that we may be missing, to create that environment of communication and feedback that many times a leader who thinks that they see everything will avoid. And this goes back to the culture, that culture that you were saying. If you're not listening for feedback, saying, hey, what do you got for me? Ken, what do you see that I don't see? Tell me what's up. Make me feel uncomfortable, right? And creating that open collaborative communication is so important for making smart decisions, for staying on target, for going for the long-term objective, and not being distracted to the shiny object. Right.
Yeah, I agree. Part of something almost implicit in what you're saying, which is another chapter in my book, I call it Know Yourself. It's about being willing to take that really hard, honest look at your own strengths, but also your own weaknesses, your own capabilities, but also your own limitations. And yours personally as well as your organizations. So, where that one of those things is your personal ability as well as your organization's ability to multitask, because sometimes, as you say, I like that line of yours, distractions masquerading as opportunities. We see this all the time. I just had a conversation with a CEO yesterday and said, part of your challenge is that you've never seen an opportunity you could walk away from, and there are only so many of these opportunities that you personally and your organization can handle. No matter how attractive this other one seems, you wind up diluting your ability to get any of them actually done when you keep taking on new ones. And so that focus on the long-term, on achieving that mission, that focus on making sure that all of your tactics help advance you towards that mission, and that refusal to be distracted by so-called opportunities is absolutely critical. I completely agree.
And because in the fog of war, when the missiles are coming and you're under the gun, the pressure, right? You may not be able to assimilate all the feedback. You can be so channelized. And so I like to relate it, as flying a fighter, you're in the jet, you can't see 360 degrees around you. And in battle, as an infantry soldier, you have different folks out there and different points on the ground that build the picture, and you're communicating. Now, when you're strapped into a jet, you can't see behind you, which is your most vulnerable position. But when your wingman's at your left 3 o'clock or right 9 o'clock, they can look over your shoulder and check what I call your 6 o'clock. That's what we say in the fighter pilot world, check 6. It's the blind spots. It's somebody having your back. We know this in the military. And so the concept of mutual support, the concept that we don't go at it alone, that we need each other to build a picture, to create situational awareness on where the threat is, where our teammates in formation, what's our fuel state, our resources. So many folks coming together. And I think that's what makes the military so much more effective. We have assigned roles and responsibilities. We're maniacally prepared for them. We've rehearsed the contingencies. We know our role. We're disciplined, which is one of the chapters in your book, one of the last chapters, which is really the glue, right? The discipline and the focus, saying, I know my lane. I know what I'm responsible for. And if I go outside of that lane, then I may be messing up the entirety of that mission. And it's so important that we share this with companies who who often lack the disciplines, who often lack the relationship skills necessary to build that collaborative culture that innovates, adapts to change, and ultimately grows.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. One of my frustrations is that so often in the corporate world, they unintentionally build compensation systems that don't reward the kind of behavior you're talking about. They don't reward somebody for helping the other guy out and warning him that there's somebody on his six that's about to fire a missile at him. We create these compensation systems in which individuals or their small teams are rewarded for their successes. They get no benefit whatsoever from helping somebody else, and it's this system that rewards individuals over the organization. And I think that that's to some extent what's happened in some of the examples that I gave. For example, the Wells Fargo one, and it was the way people were rewarded, and in some cases not punished. In my company, because we're transaction oriented, and we work on merger and acquisition deals. Every time a deal closes, several things happen. One is we ring a bell. Everybody celebrates in the success of everybody. We congratulate people. But two, and at least as meaningful, is every time a deal closes, everybody in the company gets a check. The size of that check varies depending on different people, but the receptionist gets a check. The person who is the marketing manager gets a check. Every single person gets a check when a deal closes, and so we don't get this, well, what's in it for me if I help? There is something in it for them, and we try to do things with the reward system that you don't often see in corporate America. I learned a long time ago that culture starts from the top. It doesn't start from the middle, it doesn't start from the bottom. And the other thing I learned a long time ago is regardless of the words that come out of the top, people ultimately do what you pay them to do. And
right.
if you don't reward them for good behavior, then you're not going to get good behavior.
Yeah, it goes back to the processes, the standards and regulations, the compliance issues. And you're right, we create our own monsters. And with the greatest of intentions, a leader may want to inspire that trust, that commitment from their team. But if they're rewarding the wrong behaviors, human nature is going to say, "Hey, I'm gonna do what's best to fill my pocketbook and help me pay for my vacation next week," right? And so that's what also instigates lack of integrity, cutting corners, committing safety violations, not fessing up when you mess up. And so I think you bring up a great point there. You have to look at the processes, and also I think once again back on the human level is to create environments where people are able to admit when they mess up. Maybe the folks at Wells Fargo, and even if you look at WorldCom and Enron, if you have an environment where you can't admit your mistake, where you can't say, "I messed up, I'm willing to accept the consequences, but I want to do the right thing," right, for the right reasons. If you're not having that, if you don't have that culture, if you're going to rip people's heads off or cut them off at the knees when they admit a mistake, then you're also preventing that culture of trust. You're preventing your organization from making good decisions for not just for their constituents, their customers, but for their fellow employees who are often reaping the negative consequences of their peers' actions. So
I completely agree. I think I think that you need to take these principles that you and I talk about in our books, and I know we've been talking here for a little more than 30 minutes, so we'll probably have to wrap this up, but I think people need to take that. It needs to be layered, or the whole concept of culture needs to be layered on top of it, because you can be mission oriented, you can be disciplined, you can try to take the long view, but if you don't have a culture that builds teams, that to some extent allows people to speak truth to power. That if you don't build that culture, you can't possibly have a successful organization. I think your book is great. I'm glad I had an opportunity to review it. I'm glad I had an opportunity to meet you. It's been cool. It's been an honor.
Same here, and it's just another example of two folks who connect. I think it's important to be around like-minded individuals culturally. Like, we have different backgrounds, obviously, but I think culturally our DNA is very similar. We learned it in the military, and that's my whole concept of not flying solo, building relationships with people who you can call out to for help, right? Who you can celebrate with, who emulate excellence in your life. And I think as we look to the future, with our government, with the constant changes, the globality of the world in which we live, our focus on entrepreneurialism. So many people are leaving corporate America, going and doing their own things because they say, you know what, I'm seeing these leaders out there who aren't really emulating the things that I was taught about in school, in the books, or whatever, and they're going out on their own. And I think we have to build that entrepreneurial spirit back into corporate America. Leverage some of the principles that we learned in the military, which is really about adapting to changes amidst very adverse environments where if we don't do our job right, the consequences are pretty great. But it's also about the love. I know you, when you were in the military, and by the way, it's very few people like yourself who enlisted and then went through the ranks and eventually became an officer, which is a great thing. You got to love what we do, right? I mean, the thrill of it, right, Ken? The thrill of going to battle, the thrill of having that sense of responsibility, the excitement, the adrenaline. You have to love what you do. Flying fighters and being in combat, we're hand in hand. None of us wanted to go to war, like you mentioned before, but I absolutely love flying fighters, the thrill, the excitement. And if we don't love what we do, if we're not willing to make those sacrifices, no book, no philosophy, no speaker can change anything, right, Ken?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I love the 10 years I spent in the Marine Corps. I love the 15 years that I spent learning how to do what I do before I started this investment bank. And I love coming to work every day. I love working with the clients, and I love trying to do it in a way that encourages my people to do the right things for the right reasons every time, and hopefully when we do the right things for our clients every time. It's the only culture that I believe in. So happy Veterans Day.
You got it. Hey, real quick, can you share how people can get a copy of the Marine Corps Way to Win on Wall Street? Right, the Marine Corps Way to Win. How do they learn about you? Because you have more to offer than just your book, obviously, as well.
Absolutely. The book, The Marine Corps Way to Win on Wall Street, is available every way everybody can get any book. All the online booksellers, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, et cetera, all the physical bookstores, although everybody does everything via electronic these days. It's available in Kindle version. It's available in audiobooks. And it applies to a lot more than Wall Street. The publisher liked the Wall Street in the title because that's where I work now, but it's totally applicable to the corporate world, and I believe there's a few people in Washington D.C. that would do well to read the book and follow the principles.
I think a lot of folks who run small businesses as well, the same principles apply, right? And they have a lot more flexibility. My book, Never Fly Solo, obviously. If you go to yourwingman.com, you can learn more about it there, and there's a bunch of stuff to sign up for. Ken, what's if there's one thing you wanna leave with the folks that are listening today? It's, like we said, it's Veterans Day. It's a very special day for our country. What's one thing that you'd like to leave for any aspiring leader looking to grow, to build their business and to build their future of success?
I think as we talked, culture is extremely important. Culture starts at the top, and it starts with an attitude that says we're going to do the right things for the right reasons every time, no excuses. Right. And from that, a lot of things devolve. Clearly, the whole idea you and I were just talking about, which is to focus on the long view, to understand the long-term mission and to make sure all tactics align with that mission, to be willing to take a stand and to tell people, it's a concept you've got as well, tell people sometimes things that they don't want to hear, not just blowing smoke, as we say. And sometimes it means speaking truth to power. It's about being willing to know yourself, your weaknesses as well as your strengths, and not get caught up in doing things you shouldn't do. It's about knowing the other guy. It's about not having a caricature of the other guy. I see this too often in the news. You know, the bad guys just all hate Americans and they just want to kill us, and that's all there is to it. You need to go a little deeper than that and understand why people are doing what they're doing. It's about negotiating with honor, and not taking advantage of the unwary, the unsophisticated, or the weak. And it's about discipline. I like your concept about chair flying. It's about figuring out the right way to do things and not skipping steps and doing it with discipline and doing it with honor. And if you can put it all together, then I think you can make a lot of money. I have nothing against people making money as long as they do things the right way, as long as they do things in a way that they can continue to hold their heads high, and that's really what it's all about.
Yeah, and capitalism is a wonderful thing that happens to our country. I always say capitalism and meritocracy doesn't hurt America, buttheads do. You know, folks that don't have integrity and compassion and empathy or appreciation for the folks out there. And like you mentioned before, you know, you got to know your enemy. And I think today, a competitor today could be a partner tomorrow. Look at the M&A world that you were in. And by the way, I was in the M&A world as well. I want to talk to you more about that. My twin brother's still in the business and I consult with him a lot. You never know when you're going to be flying in formation with somebody that could be a competitor today.
Absolutely true.
You know, look at East Germany now. You know, we're now allies with Germany. This is not just on a business level, but on a macro level, on a geopolitical level. Respect your enemy, but it goes back to that culture. And I think it starts with us, like you said, that know yourself. If you don't have the blood and guts, the integrity, that what I call the inner wingman, the values that start with the blood and then transfer everywhere to the rest of your being, those values, then you can't ever expect to be part of an organization that emulates that as well. I think I want to leave with something that I think the most important thing that we can do in creating that trust and those partnerships and creating environments in our organization where people can come to us for help is to be willing to ask for help. A Marine, anybody in the military knows when to call out Mayday. And when you build relationships in your life where people feel comfortable going to you for help, then you're going to build relationships with others who you can build trust with and call out Mayday for, because that's when the challenges, when challenges come, that's when our true commitment to success is tested. I also want to just share one thing, especially for Veterans Day. I always say, if we want to be Americans, if we want to say thank you to the Americans who fight for our country, we need to be the type of Americans worth fighting for. I think you'd agree, Ken, that we don't need to wear uniforms to serve, that we do it every day in our communities and our businesses and our families. We don't need to wear a flight suit or carrying an M16 to be of service to our country and to our businesses and families. So on that note, Ken, I'm blessed and honored to have met you to share some of our thoughts on this program. The Marine Corps Way meets Never Fly Solo. What got us here won't get us there, Ken. We got to keep pushing up the throttle and evolving. And you're a great man, a great leader. I look forward to shaking your hands in person one day, and I wish you continued blessings and success, sir.
Thanks, Waldo. I feel the same. Great to meet you. Happy Veterans Day.
Happy Veterans Day to you, sir.